Growing up, my world was confined within the walls of a house that creaked and groaned like an old ship adrift in a sea of shadows. The air was always thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, and the dim light from the single bulb in my room cast long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance in rhythm with the whispers of the night. My bedroom was small, barely large enough to hold my bed and a rickety dresser. The walls were painted a dull, peeling shade of blue that reminded me of stormy skies, and the single window, curtained with heavy drapes, rarely let in the sun. Instead, it allowed only slivers of pale moonlight to slip through, painting eerie patterns on the floor. The nights were the hardest. As I lay in bed, half awake, caught in the liminal space between dreams and reality, I would hear it, the voice. It started softly, a mere murmur beneath the chorus of the house settling into the earth. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or perhaps my imagination playing tricks on me. But soon, the voice became a presence, as real to me as the creaking floorboards or the rustle of the curtains in the breeze. I named it Whisper. Whisper was unlike any imaginary friend I had heard about from other kids. It didn't ask me to play or imagine adventures. Instead, it spoke to me in hushed tones, sharing secrets about the house and offering cryptic comments about the world beyond my understanding. Whisper seemed to know things it shouldn't, things that unsettled me, yet drew me in with an inexplicable fascination. My parents were often absent, consumed by their work and adult concerns that left little room for a curious, lonely child. They assumed my mutterings were part of some innocent childhood phase, something I would outgrow. With no siblings to confide in, and my parents too busy to notice the subtle changes in my demeanor, I found myself turning to Whisper more and more. The voice filled a void, a companion during the twilight hours when the rest of the world faded away, and it was just me and the murmurs in the dark. Whisper became my confidant, the keeper of my fears and the anchor in the ever-present shadows that loomed just beyond the reach of the feeble light. In those quiet moments, I began to realize that Whisper was not merely a figment of my imagination. It felt too real, too knowing, and as I drifted each night into that half-conscious state, I could sense its presence, hovering, waiting, like a shadow clinging to the edge of my awareness. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have been more afraid of Whisper from the start. But as a child, I was both terrified and enthralled, caught in a web of curiosity and dread that only tightened its grip with each whispered secret and every creak of the ancient house. As time went on, Whisper's presence became more insistent. The conversations we had were far from the playful banter of childhood friends. Instead, they ventured into the strange and unsettling, topics that left me with a sense of unease long after the voice had faded into the night. Whisper seemed to know secrets about the house, details that no one else could possibly know. It would speak of hidden corners and forgotten passages, places I had never dared to explore. "There's a room beneath the stairs," it would murmur, "where the light never touches and the air is always cold." I was both frightened and intrigued by these stories, torn between the urge to investigate and the fear of what I might find. But what truly disturbed me were the predictions. Whisper had a way of hinting at things yet to come, small incidents that unfolded with uncanny accuracy. "Your father will forget his keys again," it would say, and sure enough, the next morning I'd hear him cursing as he rummaged through the house. "There will be a storm tonight," it warned once, and I watched from my window as thunderclouds rolled in, darkening the sky. These predictions, though seemingly trivial, began to weigh heavily on me. It was as if Whisper could see threads of fate woven through the fabric of our lives, and I was helplessly entangled in its web. Each time one came true, a chill would creep down my spine, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that Whisper was somehow orchestrating these events. As if the eerie conversations weren't enough, Whisper began to manifest itself more tangibly. At first, it was just a sense of presence, a weight in the room, a cold spot at the foot of my bed. But soon, I started seeing it. In the dim glow of the nightlight, I'd catch glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking in the corner of my eye, always just beyond my full view. It was as if Whisper had taken form, a dark silhouette that flickered like a candle flame in the darkness. Despite the fear these encounters evoked, I found myself increasingly drawn to Whisper. It was as if the voice held a strange power over me, a pull that I couldn't resist. Whisper understood me in a way no one else did. It listened without judgment, shared my fears, and promised secrets that only it could reveal. There was a certain comfort in its presence, a familiarity that made the shadows feel less lonely. I knew that my attachment to Whisper was growing, that I was treading a dangerous line between fascination and fear. But in those moments when the world outside my room seemed vast and unwelcoming, Whisper was my constant, my confidant. It was the voice that lulled me to sleep, the shadow that watched over me in the night, and the unseen friend who promised to stay by my side no matter what. Little did I know, Whisper's hold on me was tightening, binding us together in ways I could not yet understand. The line between reality and the shadows was beginning to blur, and I was about to discover just how deep Whisper's influence truly ran. My parents began to notice the changes in me, my withdrawal from the world around me, the way I avoided sleep, and how I would mutter to myself when I thought no one was listening. They chalked it up to the whims of childhood, assuming it was nothing more than an overactive imagination or a phase I would soon outgrow. Children invent all sorts of things to keep themselves entertained, my mother would say with a dismissive wave of her hand, never suspecting the depth of Whisper's influence over me. They couldn't see what I saw or hear the voice that filled my nights with dread and fascination. As much as I wanted to tell them about Whisper, I knew they wouldn't understand. To them, it was just a figment of my imagination, a harmless imaginary friend conjured to keep the loneliness at bay. But Whisper was anything but harmless. The incidents began subtly, almost imperceptibly, until they became impossible to ignore. It started with little things, objects that seemed to move on their own, like the time I found my favorite toy inexplicably perched on the highest shelf, far out of my reach. "You wanted it there," Whisper had whispered, as if my unspoken desires had somehow made it so. Then there were the accidents. I remember one evening when Whisper told me, "The vase will fall tonight." I watched in stunned silence as my mother accidentally knocked over the antique vase in the hallway, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Each time Whisper's predictions came true, I felt an icy thrill run through me, mingling fear with a sense of awe at its power. But it wasn't long before these incidents took a darker turn. One night, as a storm raged outside, Whisper warned me, "The tree will fall." I tried to dismiss it, but a shiver ran down my spine. Hours later, I awoke to a thunderous crash as the old oak in our backyard toppled, narrowly missing the house. The realization that Whisper's words held such sway over reality filled me with a growing sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that Whisper's intentions were far from benevolent. As I grew older, I began to question the nature of this presence that had haunted my childhood. "What are you?" I asked one night, my voice trembling as I confronted the shadow lurking at the foot of my bed. Whisper's response was cryptic, chilling in its simplicity. "I am what you made me," it said, its voice curling around the edges of my consciousness like smoke. "I am the echo of your fears and the keeper of your secrets." Its words sent a cold shock through me, raising questions I was too afraid to fully explore. Had I somehow given life to Whisper through my fears and loneliness? Was it a part of me, or something far darker, feeding off my emotions? The more I pondered these questions, the more I felt trapped in Whisper's web, as if every whispered secret and prediction had tied us together in ways I couldn't unravel. I realized that Whisper was not merely an imaginary friend, but a shadow with a will of its own, and I was powerless to escape its grasp. The confrontation left me shaken, my trust in Whisper shattered. Yet, despite the fear, I couldn't deny the twisted comfort its presence provided. Whisper had been my only companion for so long, and though its true nature terrified me, I couldn't bring myself to sever the bond we shared. The line between friend and foe had blurred beyond recognition, and I was left wondering if I would ever truly be free of the shadow that loomed over my life. The night that changed everything began like any other. I lay in bed, caught between the comforting haze of sleep and the creeping dread of Whisper's presence. The room was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains, casting elongated shadows across the walls. The house was unnervingly silent, the kind of silence that amplifies even the smallest sound into a deafening roar. I drifted in and out of sleep, my mind a turbulent sea of half-formed dreams, until a sharp, icy voice cut through the fog. "Tonight," Whisper said, its voice more tangible than ever before, "you will finally see me." A jolt of terror snapped me fully awake. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of the shadowy presence that had haunted me for so long. And then I saw it, standing at the foot of my bed, more solid and menacing than I had ever imagined. Whisper had taken form, a dark, humanoid shape with eyes that glowed like embers in the night. The sight was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a manifestation of every nightmare I had ever had. Its presence filled the room, the air growing colder and thicker as it loomed over me. "You are mine," Whisper intoned, its voice resonating deep within my bones. "I will keep you here, with me, forever." Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, drowning out all rational thought. I scrambled out of bed, my feet barely touching the floor as I raced toward the door. My only thought was to escape, to get away from the shadow that had claimed me as its own. But as I reached for the doorknob, it slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. The room seemed to warp around me, shadows stretching and twisting, engulfing every inch of space until there was nowhere left to run. The whispers filled my ears, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a symphony of dread. In my desperation, a flicker of defiance sparked within me. I had spent years living under the thrall of this entity, allowing it to seep into every corner of my existence. But no more. I would not be a prisoner in my own life. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I turned to face Whisper. My voice shook, but my resolve was unyielding. "I won't let you keep me," I declared, each word cutting through the shadows like a blade. "I am not yours. I never was." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, the oppressive weight of Whisper's presence wavering as if caught off guard by my sudden rebellion. The glowing eyes flickered, dimming slightly, and the shadows that had encased me began to recede, peeling away from the walls like a dissipating fog. Whisper let out a low, guttural sound that could have been a growl or a sigh, its form flickering uncertainly in the dim light. I felt its grip on my mind weaken, the chains of fear and isolation loosening with every heartbeat. In that moment of defiance, I realized that I had the power to break free, to reclaim my life from the shadow that had haunted me for so long. Whisper had thrived on my fear, but my courage was its undoing. It was a battle I had fought my entire life, and finally, I was winning. The figure at the foot of my bed faded, retreating back into the shadows from whence it came, until all that remained was the faint echo of its voice, whispering one final promise: "I will return." Though I knew the battle was not truly over, I had taken the first step toward freedom. The room was silent once more, the shadows now nothing more than shadows, and I stood alone, breathing deeply as the realization of what I had done washed over me. In confronting Whisper, I had broken its hold and uncovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. But I also knew that this was only the beginning, that the shadow might someday return. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt something like hope. Hope that I could face whatever came next, and that even in the darkest of nights, I was no longer alone. In the days and weeks that followed my confrontation with Whisper, the world outside my window seemed impossibly bright, the sunlight a stark contrast to the shadows that had so often filled my nights. Yet, despite the outward calm, I knew that things could never return to the way they once were. Leaving the house was not an easy decision, but it felt necessary. Each creak of the floorboards and rustle of the curtains reminded me of the presence that had lurked in every shadowed corner. My parents, unaware of the true depth of what had transpired, agreed to the move, believing it would help me grow beyond the imaginary terrors of my childhood. But even in a new home, free from the memories that haunted the old one, I couldn't escape the lingering fear that Whisper would return. Its promise echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that the shadow was never truly gone, just waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. My sleep became restless, plagued by nightmares and the nagging feeling of being watched. I would often wake in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced that Whisper was near, only to find myself alone in the darkness. The line between dreams and reality blurred, leaving me in a perpetual state of unease, never quite sure if what I saw and heard was real. I became distrustful of my own perceptions, questioning every flicker of light and every stray sound. Was it just the wind? Or was Whisper whispering to me once more? The slightest shift in shadows sent my heart into a frantic rhythm, as if Whisper's presence still lingered just out of sight, biding its time. Despite these fears, I slowly began to rebuild my life. Each day was a battle to reclaim my sense of self, to find a new normal in the aftermath of the shadow's influence. I surrounded myself with light, both literal and metaphorical, seeking comfort in the warmth of day and the presence of those who loved me. Yet, the shadow had left its mark, an indelible imprint on my psyche that I couldn't fully shake. I learned to live with it, to carry the weight of those dark memories while refusing to let them define me. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, the familiar hum of everyday life surrounding me, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. My heart skipped a beat, the sound so familiar it was as if no time had passed since that night of terror. "I am still here," it murmured, its voice drifting on the edge of consciousness like a shadowy echo from the past. I froze, the room around me suddenly seeming too quiet, too still. For a moment, I was a child again, caught in the grip of the unknown, my mind a turbulent sea of fear and uncertainty. But as the initial shock subsided, I realized something important. While Whisper's voice was a reminder that it was never truly gone, I was no longer the frightened child it once held captive. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, no longer bound by the chains of fear that once ensnared me. With a deep breath, I acknowledged the voice, knowing that I had the power to defy it, to keep it at bay with the strength I had discovered within myself. Whisper might remain a part of me, a shadow in the recesses of my mind, but I was no longer its prisoner. In that moment, I understood that while some shadows may linger, they need not define us. I had learned to live in the light, even as the darkness whispered my name, and in doing so, I had found a way to be free,